Greetings, welcome to the Dividing Line. It is a Friday. We're taking 4 calls right off the top of the program today. Plan to get done in no more than 90 minutes, maybe a little bit shorter than that. I'm going to be joining Chris Arnzen on Iron Sharpens Iron this afternoon, 4 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. So that's why we're doing it early today, so I can multitask in essence and be on with Chris. So if you haven't been listening to Iron Sharpens Iron, you want to look him up, and we'll be doing 2 hours on the program today. So let's get to our phone callers who are obviously all on Twitter. Well, one maybe not, but the rest of them are on Twitter, and that's how they got in. You might say, well, that's not fair. Well, if you think that's not fair, there's a parable that Jesus told about the people hired to do work that you need to go read. And it's just go with that. So, okay, let's talk to Aaron in Washington. Hi, Aaron.
Howdy, Dr. White. This is, well, I actually live in Moscow and go to Doug Wilson's church. So,
okay.
Howdy from the Moscow crew.
All right.
And thanks again for all your work, you and Rich both. Just wanted to ask, so been listening to a lot of intertextuality material between Old and New Testament, and the discussion came up about the Jewish view of original sin and all of that kind of thing, and how the person speaking didn't believe that federal headship was a fit because of the, so as transgression came through one to spread to all men, so that, you know, the redemption of one redeems all men. And really it was just, I guess my question is, am I to understand that, I mean, I believe that federal headship is correct, but what I'm trying to figure out is how does Jesus come out with a perfectly clean human nature? Is that what the virgin birth is supposed to kind of get around?
That's pretty important.
Does that guilt of Adam come through the male line, and that's why the virgin birth through Mary allows Jesus to be perfect?
Well, that's certainly
uncorrupted human.
That's certainly traditionally how it's been understood. There is obviously that very unusual aspect of the Lord's nature, and many people have understood that. I mean, that's not Paul's point in Romans 5, though. By paralleling Jesus with Adam, Adam certainly did not have a standard parentage either. So maybe that's where the parallel is. But there's no question that the teaching in Romans chapter 5 is there's 2 humanities, one in Adam, one in Christ. In one you have death, and one you have life. Everybody's in the one, but only certain people are in the other, and that's the key issue of justification by faith and the covenant community and everything else. Now, as to what Jews believed prior to Paul, well, the Jews believed a lot of things prior to Paul, and the intertestamental literature is extremely broad, and there's all sorts of things you can find in intertestamental literature. I understand, for example, I may take the time to listen to it, that there's a new book out by Michael Heiser on demons that is a good example of when you take intertestamental literature as really extremely central to your interpretation of both the Old and New Testaments. But be that as it may, the point is it's a multifaceted body of literature. We don't obviously have an exhaustive record of what those people believed, but what has survived to our day illustrates many different streams of tradition and understanding. And while those are interesting for us to be able to understand the disputes that were going on between Pharisees and Sadducees, and where the Essenes may have come from, and all the rest of that kind of stuff, it can't be made an interpretive lens that limits what the New Testament apostles can teach. And so I don't know how anybody would know what, quote unquote, the Jews. Whenever somebody says, "Well, the Jews believed," I know that I'm talking to somebody that really doesn't know what they're talking about, because there are anyone who reads that literature goes, well, this rabbi said this and that rabbi said that, and we're not exactly sure what that rabbi meant by that, but then there was this guy over here. Those are the people that have actually read that literature and recognize that to go, well, the Jews believed means you've probably got, a horse in this race, a dog in this race, however you want to put it. You're probably trying to find some way of promoting a particular perspective. So,
could I ask a clarifying, just to drill down on verse 19 of Romans 5? The kathistemi, I believe is the word in Greek, is made or constituted. Whereas the one were made sinners, many were made righteous. Is that like a declarative, or is that maybe like a forensic sense, or? Because what I'm trying to understand is how because it says earlier that the transgression of Adam, that the transgressions that came after Adam were not like the transgression of Adam. And so I'm just kind of trying to figure out in what way are they made sinners by Adam's act.
Yeah, well, for as through the one man's disobedience, hoi polloi. You've probably heard that phrase before, the hoi polloi. The other folks. Well, that's what it is here. It's hoi polloi. Hoi polloi hamar toloi. The many were constituted, made. It's kathistemi. It's a very, very old, all the histemi verbs are very, very old verbs. That's why anyone who learns Greek hates them, because they don't fit into the nice, neat categories of later verbs. But through the disobedience of the one man, sinners, the many were made. In the same way also through, using the same preposition, dia, the obedience of the one, and some manuscripts, I would imagine, I'm just guessing here, but some manuscripts put man, but simply the one righteous, and that's put in direct parallel to hamartoiloi, righteous, same term, kathistemi, hoi polloi. So you have two hoi pollois. One is constituted as sinners, one is constituted as righteous, and very much the only way to understand this is within the law court concept that recognizes federal headship. So is there not clear examples of this with the sin of Achan and things that were in the very founding of the nation of Israel? You have federal headship being acted out in the very actions of the nation suffering for the actions of the king, or situation with Achan at Ai, and examples like that. So I'm not sure how, obviously there were Jews prior to the days of Jesus who were very influenced by other things outside of Scripture. And maybe they would have developed different understandings, more of a secularized understanding, especially Greek philosophy. There are Jewish writers, Philo and others, that were deeply influenced by forms of Greek philosophy too, that might not like that covenantal type of thinking. But certainly Paul is not out in the boonies someplace. He's not some strange, no one's ever heard of that idea before in his argumentation. But yeah, there was lots of different perspectives that would have been represented, and I would imagine that the debates that Paul had in the synagogues would have been focused upon things like that, as to exactly where in the midst of those traditions that understanding was falling. So.
Well, just to tie the two pieces of the question together, because you kind of pointed out the connection. The argument originally was that Romans 5:12 doesn't say that guilt is imputed to all of humanity, just death. It comes to all humanity after that. And I was kind of rationalizing in my mind that, 519 only makes sense if it's federal headship that's in view here, because you can't have somebody constituted legally as being, declared a sinner.
Right.
And so it was just kind of referring to the tripartite fall of the Old Testament, Genesis 3, 6, and Babel. So anyway, thank you for the help. It really helped clear it up.
Yeah, you have to remember that if someone doesn't like, if someone has a tradition and therefore there is a passage of scripture they don't like, there will be ways to spin things. And in the final analysis, the best way to determine if someone is engaging in meaningful exegesis is to test the consistency of their hermeneutics across all of their theology, but especially in those areas where it gets tough. There are tough passages of scriptures. No one's going to say that Romans 5:12 through 19 is an easy text. But is the person really wanting to let the apostle define things, or do they have an external idea that they are really trying to make sure doesn't get wrecked by what the apostle is saying, and therefore they'll use one way of understanding verse 12 that ends up disconnecting verse 19. As you notice, the only way to really hold it together is to see it all as a consistent reality. And once you lose that, you sort of lose the whole shooting match, as us old folks used to say. So, all right, Aaron, thanks for your phone call.
Thank you. Blessings to you and yours.
All right, God bless. Bye-bye. All right, let's go to Anthony in New Jersey. Hi, Anthony.
Hello, Dr. White. How are you?
Doing good.
This is my second time calling. I just quickly want to say that Rich has been nothing but pleasant every time that I've called now. He seems like a nice guy.
We're very thankful that even though the Chinese are in control of the drug supply, we have been able to get a consistent flow of whatever we have Rich on to make him nice to people. So that's been
perfect. So my question is centered around the Garden of Gethsemane, because out here in New Jersey we have a kind of take your pick of heresy. We just have so many different types of heretical camps out here, from the Hebrew Israelites to
Hebrew Israelites. They're just like Reformed Baptists, aren't they?
Yeah, just small differences.
Small.
When it comes to the oneness theology, I'm curious, first of all, if looking at the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus says, "Not my will, your will be done," is a proper example of differentiating personhoods between Christ and the Father, and also, if it is a good example, then do we see some sort of division of will between Jesus and the Father? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. So, what has to be remembered when you're talking about Jesus, you're and the relationship of the Father, and then introducing the issue of will, things get very, very, very complicated, because this is where two unique realities of divine revelation intersect. What I mean by that is the doctrine of the Trinity. There is nothing in the created order to which you can compare it, because only God exists in this fashion. Only God's being is unlimited, and hence could be shared by three persons. Therefore, there's nothing you can compare that to in the created order. But then the incarnate one is likewise unique, because there's only been one incarnation, and there's only been one hypostatic union, and the requirements for Jesus to function as the proper sin bearer for the people of God are very specific. And so it's those two that we're asking about here, when in the garden Jesus says, not my will, but yours be done. Because there is, in a sense, the one will of God, the perfect consistency of Father, Son, and Spirit in the accomplishment of all divine actions. There can be no disunity in the Godhead, all these things, in talking about the one divine will. But Jesus is one person with two natures. And so he is a true human being as well. And therefore, to avoid the error of Apollinarianism, which certain well-known Christian apologists have actually fallen into, that I won't name, but you can just look it up. He calls it Neo-Apollinarianism. But anyways, to avoid that idea where the human nature of Christ basically becomes just a physical manifestation rather than a true human nature, which is interesting in light of the last call. In fact, I was going to do this, Rich, but write down the call topics so that we're not sitting here at the end of the program going, what were those about? I don't remember what they were about. So Romans 5 and Not My Will But Yours, Bonson Sproul, and LDS/Precept. So do a screenshot, do something, and that way we can remember. It's weird. We sit here at the end of the program, and we just got done with the program. Then we sit there looking at each other going, so what were those calls about? I don't remember. It's really weird. It's very, very strange. And I think it's always sort of been that way. So,
well, yeah, we can't exactly blame it on the short-term memory thing because we were doing it when we were young.
That's the whole point. I don't know why it works that way. I want to blame it on the gray hair and the bald head, but it's always been that way. So anyways, write these down. But it's interesting because there is an interface between this and what the last question was, is because how can Jesus be the proper second Adam, the obedient man over against the disobedient Adam, if his humanity was not real or was only partial? And so a human being has a will. And so that's what is being, once you have the expression of the incarnate one speaking in the context of what he is going to do in the incarnate state, then that's what you're looking at in the garden. That's a incredibly unique situation in all of history. It had never happened before, the incarnation, and we only have John 17 and John 11. We just don't, maybe the baptism briefly, the transfiguration, maybe. I'm just thinking of times when there's communication between Father and Son. We don't have very much in the divine revelation that could put us into a context where we can see this unique relationship going on. And really, when you think about it, it's a tremendous, really a tremendous privilege to get to hear two of the divine persons in the Godhead speaking to one another. But this happens within the context of the incarnation. And so this is the Son speaking to the Father, but in the incarnate state. And so the Son has a divine nature, but the will that's being spoken of here is the will that submits to that of the Father. And so we have to be careful. It's really easy to get our systematic theologies out and read it back into a text when that may not have been exactly what the original author had in mind. But in this context, what is being said in, for example, Luke chapter 22, verse 42, is plainly the man Jesus speaking not of fear of death. I think it's important. We need to recognize this. He's not speaking about fear of death. He's speaking about being made sin in behalf of his people, and that there are many men who have gone to their deaths with great bravery, and Jesus certainly could have done that as well.
Yeah.
But no one has existed in perfect purity, and yet then is made sin for us. That again, the cross is the center point of history, absolutely unique. As I was reviewing that the Islamic video a couple days ago, same issue there. We're talking about one of the most amazing ideas that has ever entered into the heart of man, and it came from divine revelation. So that's how I would understand that. It does indicate that clearly this is not an internal conversation within Jesus. which is what you have in oneness theology. I've said many times that oneness theology, and they know this. If you listen to them talking to themselves, I think the leaders today know that their responses, David Bernard and others, their responses on the prayer life of Jesus are wishful thinking. I think in their more honest moments, alone in the car, on the walk in the woods, whatever it might be, they're like, man, that really doesn't work. That just doesn't. That just really stinks. It's tough. So, and unfortunately, a lot of evangelicals don't know the doctrine of the Trinity well enough to recognize that that's the real issue with oneness is the evidence of the personhood of the Son and the reality that the Son as a divine person pre-existed the incarnation. Most evangelicals just don't know where to go, and that's why we don't make a lot of inroads there.
Yeah, so you would just say that this is a pretty solid example of two persons.
Well, two persons in the sense of the incarnate person speaking to the divine person. They would argue that this is an internal conversation. I'm thinking within the doctrine of the Trinity, this is in light of the preceding portion of the verse. Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. That's the Son as human being, focusing upon what's coming and expressing to the Father the inexpressible dread of being made sin for his people. We can't even, I don't think we can, we sing songs about it. We really can't begin to understand what exactly that meant. So I wouldn't use it as an indication of the eternal existence of the Son, because even from the oneness perspective, they say, yeah, but he's incarnate right now, even from your perspective. That's true. But I would challenge the necessity on the part of the oneness person of saying this is actually an internal conversation where Jesus is having, where the human side of Jesus is hoping the divine side of Jesus will find a way out of this. I mean, because that's literally what you have, instead of what is really going on, and that is the deep expression on the part of Jesus. And it is important, I think, to notice Jesus knows what's coming. If you adopt what is taught in most seminaries today, Jesus didn't know what was coming and was shocked at it. All this becomes gibberish. We're wasting our time. So if you went to Union Theological Seminary, all this is gibberish because they don't have a foundation there for even understanding it. So it is important to recognize that when we're doing apologetics with oneness folks, we are doing apologetics at a much higher level. There's actually a lot of assumed stuff that lays the foundation of talking to oneness folks. We can't have a conversation with oneness folks. That's a conversation worth having because they have as high a view of Scripture as we do. Oneness cannot exist within liberalism. Oneness collapses as soon as liberalism enters in. That's why they are so absolute. You look at the UPCI, long dresses and head coverings. There's a reason for that, because they recognize as soon as any type of diminishment of old standards comes in, it all falls apart. There's no backup for them. So yeah, I think that's what's going on in Luke 22:42. If that's the text you're looking at, it's the primary one.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks for your call today.
All right, God bless.
All right, God bless. Bye-bye. I went long on that. Sorry about that. Matt and Jacob. Let's talk to Matt. Hi, Matt. Oh, man. Matt and Jacob are both in California. Let us stop the program right now. Have a word of prayer for our brothers who are under communist control.
Help. Help us.
Help.
Hi, Dr. White.
So Matt, how long is your hair now?
I cut it myself.
Oh no!
Not long ago.
Oh
yeah.
no! Well,
I've got a bowl cut.
I cut my hair myself every morning in the shower. So I would just. Rich cut his too, and it's horrific. It really is. I've managed not to laugh, but it's okay.
Well, I'm also the one caller who didn't get in through Twitter, so it's kind of not fair. And I've borne the heat of the day, and.
I see.
Need to
Okay.
get more than a denarius.
Okay. Well, I think you didn't read that parable closely enough, but we'll go from there.
So my question then, really what prompted my question was the program that you had with Dr. Jason Lyle about presuppositional apologetics, and man, I've really appreciated his work, and I've appreciated Bonson's work, and so I've sort of grown up on Sproul, and it was hard for me to disagree with Sproul on apologetics, but I ended up having to do it. So
you got to remember when you're talking to RC that RC doesn't mind if you disagree with him at all. You know, what's wrong with you people only works for some people.
Well, now you've got me down a rabbit trail because you said once, I think, as far as like why did Sproul not see the truth of presuppositional apologetics? And you said once that it may have been his love for Aquinas.
Oh, he loved Thomas. Yeah, he loved Thomas.
Yeah, but Bonson in one of his programs said that actually it was his, Gerstner was classical, and Gerstner had some fallout with Van Til once, and it just became something where if Sproul started moving toward presuppositional apologetics, it would be sort of a backhanded thing.
Well, I'm sure there were multiple. I'm sure there were multiple reasons. I did not have the couple of times that I had RC's ear personally. We went on a cruise in Hawaii. It was G. James Kennedy's cruise. He had that terrible heart attack. And they asked me and RC to take his place on this, probably much more RC than me, but on this cruise. And so I got to spend some time with RC. This was after his stroke, but he was still in real good spirits and fresh of mind. And unfortunately, most of the conversations were on issues having to do with like federal visionism and a few things like that. We didn't have a whole lot of time to discuss this particular area, and in hindsight, I wish we had. But yeah, obviously, you are if there's someone who has been a particular mentor to you, you are. It's just natural that you are going to not only adopt their viewpoints, but even when you differ, you're going to try to differ in a very respectful way, and maybe in a muted fashion, if need be. And I don't think there's anything really wrong with that. So this is an issue where I listened to the Bonson Sproul debate probably 20 years ago. I have not listened since then. I should, but I'm really busy. What I appreciated was it was collegial. It was focused. I thought it was really useful. I would recommend it to people to consider what the real issues are, what the fundamental issues are. And obviously, from my perspective, it wasn't an issue that required laying down fire and digging trenches and doing all the rest of that kind of stuff, which unfortunately happens a lot in social media on these issues.
Yeah, they were really respectful, and I, even though now I'm a flaming presuppositionalist, I still really respectful towards Sproul. And
sure.
But anyway, here I have a question about that debate, and I know you haven't listened to it for 20 years, but maybe some of the topics you're really familiar with presuppositional apologetics. So Sproul had mentioned that Calvin talked about the difference between mediate revelation and immediate revelation.
Okay.
And I think the idea there is that the law of God written on your heart, right? There's some immediate revelation where you don't have to. God doesn't reveal himself to you through the means of some mediation. There's a sense in which the law of God is written on your heart. It doesn't require your eyeballs or whatever, right?
Right.
But then the immediate revelation would be God revealing Himself through the things that were created, and a recognition that you look up at the starry host and know that the divine, something of the divine, right, from like Romans 1. But Bahnsen seemed to have a problem with that. He said it seemed like he wasn't willing to admit that there was immediate revelation and immediate revelation.
Because that sounds like, the way that you've described it sounds like a division of one aspect of revelation, which is considered general revelation. And so it seems like that is an attempt to make a division regarding what gets through. So in Romans 1, it is interesting, and this may have something to do with that. But when I'm translating this section, and it says, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse." Now, what has been made there is tois poiemasin. So, are we a part of that, or is that just the external creation? For even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, became futile in their speculations, for His heart was darkened, exchanged glory of the incorruptible God, so on and so forth. So when it says, actually it's verse 19, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. When it says in them, it's en autois, which can be translated amongst them or in them. So the from 118 and following, when you look at what's being said, I always say, when we look outward, we see it. When we look inward, we see it. It sounds like what Sproul was saying there was looking at those two and making them separate categories, immediate and mediate. And maybe that's what Bahnsen was, again, it's been 20 years, but maybe that's what Bahnsen was uncomfortable doing, is dividing the one revelation that in verse 19 says, "For God manifested it autois," to them. So it's God's manifestation, it's His intention that it function to communicate this information, because that's what leaves them, what's the last word of verse 20? Anapologetus, without an excuse. So maybe there was something. I do have it on the list of things I want to get back to, but I got people sending me books, and it's just and the Wilson stuff's keeping me busy. But I do want to get back to it and listen to it again, because you're not the first person who's asked called with a question about it. But I'm wondering if maybe Bahnsen was either preempting a direction he thought Sproul might go, or was sensing that Sproul was going to in some way insist that by dividing what general revelation actually accomplishes, that he was opening up some type of role for natural theology or something along those lines. I don't know. But whatever the last phrase of verse 19, "For God manifested to them," means, it results in the fact they're anapologetus in verse 20. So listening to that debate, and I've listened to it a bunch of times, and actually an interesting thing is that the church that I belong to, we had a visit from Vern Poythress, and we were able to sit down and speak to him and speak to his wife, who was a student of R.C. Sproul's. And she, Vern Poythress is a presuppositionalist, and she was really saying that Sproul, underneath a lot of it, was presuppositionalist at heart. And during the debate, well, we know he's Sproul a presuppositionalist now.
Oh yeah. So Sproul during the debate was acknowledging that even the distinction between immediate and immediate, that it all gets through, right? Because God gets it through. And the problem is that it's a suppression of what has gotten through. And then he goes on a tear, and he says things that the presuppositionalists would just delight to listen to. And Bahnsen even comments, he says, I'm just so happy to hear you say all these things that are so wonderfully presuppositional. And I think at that point, RC recognized, hang on, I think I'm getting too close. I need to make sure I'm not betraying, Gerstner. And he dialed back and started, he started making it more debatey. But they were really close. They were closer than a lot of new classical folks are to presuppositionalists. I mean,
well, I'm convinced. Say what you will. When I read the first book of the Institutes, man, that sounds presuppositional to me. That's about as clear as it can be. It just seems so consistent. I'm not trying to read that back into Calvin in the sense that he's not living in the same context and not surrounded by secularists and things like that. But I think if he were, that's how he would respond. So most definitely. Well, hey,
great.
Matt, I hope that by 2022 you can leave your house again over there in California. If you can get government approval or something like that, I'd pack some clothes, and once you get across the border, it's good. So just so you know. But please do not bring the voting that people do in California with you over here to Arizona. It's ruining our state. It really is. Yeah.
They'll never catch me alive. I'm already out. They can come and get me. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, Matt.
Good talking to you.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, God bless. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
I'm sorry, what was that, Rich? The razor ribbon at the border? Yeah, I'm not really sure that we have that up there. So, all right, poor Jacob, also in California, has been waiting for 43 minutes. Jacob, thank you for. Hey, you've got nothing better to do. You live in California, or are you?
That's right.
Or are you an essential worker?
I technically am. I farm almonds, so farming is considered essential here.
Well, I thank you very much for continuing to grow food. We sort of need it, and so does everybody else in the world. But let's not talk about that. What can we do for you?
So I just got done last month reading Always Ready by Bahnsen and the first volume of Ante-Nicene Fathers, and it got me thinking. I called a couple weeks ago about LDS apologetics, and how does presuppositional apologetics fit in with apologetics towards people who already believe there is a God and a basis for morality and all those things?
Right. Yeah, that's a very, very common question. And there are, you get slightly different answers depending, in my experience, on the experience of the apologist in dealing with people from other religions. One of the most common questions is, well, how would you apply presuppositionalism to the conflict with Islam? Because you're asking about Mormonism, but Mormonism is a polytheistic religion, and it's pretty obvious that you have to be able to deal with there can be no transcendental proof of God within Mormonism, obviously. Because there is no God who's the actual ground of all being. And so it's pretty easy to see how you could apply the internal critique of the system. And in fact, most Christians, even strongly anti-presuppositional Christians, will sort of, by nature, get very presuppositional with Mormons because they recognize that the view of God that they are presenting is so radically different that you can't have a meaningful conversation about who Jesus is or what salvation is or anything else because they don't have a God who created all things. Their God once lived on another planet, and he had a God before him and a God before him. And so there are so many foundational ontological questions that can't be answered, that there's no way to ground holiness or grace or anything in an exalted man from another planet. It's just not possible. And so it's sort of people just sort of naturally start going presuppositional at that point by saying, well, they start providing that internal critique of the system, saying your system doesn't make any sense. You can't have an increasing number of gods. When you go backwards in time, you got to get back to the first God. And what was he before he was a God? Well, according to you, he's a man. So now you got a man without a God, and it just doesn't make any sense. So normally it's Islam that is posited as the real challenge, because Islam has a singular God who creates all things. Everything that exists flows from his will. And so, it's easy enough to say, well, you still provide the internal critique. And so on a transcendental level, I'll mention this. I was really, really interested. I don't know, it was about 4 years ago. A friend of mine who is a Muslim has been very kind to join me when I was teaching at various seminaries, joined me via Skype. Since he lives on the other side of the planet, he normally is up at like 3 o'clock in the morning to do that, or 1 o'clock, I forget which one it was, hiding in a closet. But he's joined my classes to talk with my students. And one of my students asked a question about the issue of love, because if you've heard people talking with Muslims, one of the questions they'll ask is, well, how can you understand the nature of love within a radical monad? Unitarian concept. How can God be love eternally if there is no object of love prior to the creation itself? And I was really taken aback when my Muslim friend said, when I first started doing all this, most of us just laughed that question off. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I'm not sure we've got a good answer for that. And that's one of the reasons I love this guy, is because he listens. Many of my Muslim friends don't listen. He does. He reads. He listens. He thinks. And I owe him an email right now too. So if he's listening, I'll get to you. I'm just behind on stuff. But that is one of the questions. Is if you were to sit down, most conversations that you have with Muslims are not going to be on the level where there's going to be a major difference between a presuppositionalist and an evidentialist. And the reason for that is not because our approaches are really just the same thing. It's because of the massive language barrier and the massive amount of ignorance that the Muslim has about what it is we're saying in the first place. In other words, you spend most of your time correcting misapprehensions so you can get a basic message communicated. But in those situations where you can really get into a meaningful conversation, then, you're going to be dealing with the consistencies of the two positions, and that's where you provide the internal critique. So it's not, you're not presenting a transcendental argument because they already accept the existence of a creator God, but you are seeking to demonstrate that given their rejection of the divine revelation of that God in Jesus Christ, this creates an incoherence that does not match up. And it's interesting, over the years, I know I haven't been doing it as much recently, but over the years, I've commented many times on this program about the reality that that as I listen to Muslims talking about the heretical movements within their own faith, at least what they consider to be heretical movements in their own faith, very often it is the natural desire for them to fill in what has been taken from them by their rejection of who Jesus was prophetically. So in other words, Muhammad ends up taking the place of Jesus. Muhammad ends up, some Muslims end up celebrating Muhammad's birthday, and Muhammad in the Hadith ends up being a mediator, and the Sufis go toward the charismatic side of things because there is a spiritual nature to man that simply isn't fulfilled by a worshiping a monad. When you think about it, when you think about the role of the Holy Spirit, there is a a really important extension. God is bringing us to himself. God is enabling our worship. There's that incredible text I'm not sure anyone's ever fully figured out in Romans 8. He intercedes with us. He intercedes for us with groanings that cannot be uttered. I mean, there is a truly supernatural and personal aspect of what happens in worship that we are often not focused upon and should be. But we're often not. Part of that's because, I'll be honest with you, if you've listened very long, you've heard me say this. Most evangelical Christians do not worship as Trinitarians. They worship as monotheists, but they don't worship as Trinitarians. And that tremendously diminishes, I think, the depth of our worship. But so anyway, I wandered off there. But so yeah, it obviously is going to look different than when you're talking with an atheist. But I'm still very sensitive to not be putting the Muslim in the position of judging God either. But the thing is, they're not tending to want to do that to begin with. So presuppositionalism is not this cookie cutter. You use this one argument and everybody comes out the other end as a Christian type thing. And it does, however, influence how you're thinking about how you're going to provide the internal critique to a system that uses that says our law and our gospel are revelations from God, and that there's one true God. So how do you deal with that? And how do you where do you draw the line? I mean, how about oneness? Now you've got someone who has the exact same canon. And now you're talking about is presuppositionalism something that you apply to heresies? Because most of the early church believed, most of the early Christians after the rise of Islam that encountered Islam viewed it as a Christian heresy, not as a totally separate religion. So what does that do when you're dealing with heresy? I think honestly, that would be a really, really, really good book for an up-and-coming presuppositionalist to write. Some of us are getting too old for this type of thing, but I think maybe there might be some listening in the audience going, yeah, exactly. Because if you can clarify the line between what is a completely another religion and heresy within the faith, then that's going to really, I think, shed some light on exactly how a presuppositionalist needs to be consistent in the application along those lines too. So, man, I have gone for nearly an hour on 4 calls. This is ridiculous. I am the wordiest person on the planet. I try to do it quickly, and what do? I sit here talking forever. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Would you recommend any reading? So I read Bonson. I have on the schedule this year Frame, Oliphant, and Van Til. But it seems like, from these readings, it seems like that presuppositionalism is mainly for the atheist.
Well,
is there any book out there that would be kind of more? Maybe I'm just misreading what I've been reading, but
I know.
Is there anyone that would explain more apologetics?
Well, Oliphant does have a chapter on the issue of Islam, and I'd like to sit down and talk with him about it sometime because I wasn't. I went, okay, I see what you're saying, but how many Muslims have you talked to? was sort of the thought process that I had at that particular point in time. So you'll get a sense of the differing emphases between all of those individuals, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that that's actually a good thing because it can help to clarify stuff, but. Right now, I wouldn't know what to direct. You've got all the right names. You got all the right books. I don't know of one that goes into that particular area, though, to any particular depth. Okay. I probably couldn't recommend anything more beyond that. So, all right.
Well, yeah. Thanks. You've been a huge encouragement to get me to read the.
Well, you got plenty of time to do it. You're in California.
Yeah, I've been reading 4 hours a day. So it's crazy, but it's awesome. I've never read the Church Fathers, and my mind is blown. So,
well, yeah, now that's really interesting because when you said you were reading, the Ante-Nicene Fathers, I've obviously recommended that, but I hope I also provided enough context that a lot of people pick that up and expect to be reading R.C. Sproul, and you're not reading R.C. Sproul.
No, it's very hard to read.
It's difficult, and part of that is the context. Even when you read the preface materials, which is often very, very useful, there is an assumption, especially on scholars who do that kind of stuff, that the people reading will already know a lot about Roman culture, Greek culture, stuff like that, and most people don't. And it ends up being a real challenge. Yeah, no two ways about it.
I had to set aside Irenaeus after the first book because I was just so lost on what and I was listening to you at the same time, and I had to set it aside because I was just so lost on what he was talking about.
Yeah. Oh, there's well, especially if you're talking about against heresies.
Yeah.
It's not easy to read But the reality is Irenaeus's work on Gnosticism was our primary source for a long time, and then when Nag Hammadi was discovered, lo and behold, he was pretty spot on. He's faulted by people for condemning them as heretics and blah blah. Well, duh. But he did a good job in representing what the other side said, which is encouraging. But anyways, all right, Jacob, thanks for your phone call today.
Thank you.
All right, God bless. Bye-bye. Well, that was cool. Did you write those all down? Oh, okay. Well, I was about to close the screen, so yes, I did. Yes, I saw that one of the topics that I need to put up there is riches on Chinese drugs. So I'll try to put that in there, and people will make memes, and lots of weird stuff's going to happen. So there you go. Apple cider vinegar. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Love that stuff. Hey, look. I real quickly before I jump back into what I was saying, I got word last night. I'm really bummed. They moved the triple. Yep. I had signed up for the double triple bypass. It was the first time they're going to be offering it. Wait a minute. I need to explain that. That one race, well, it's not technically a race, but it is for those of us that ride it. I don't do much in the way of vacations, but I do leave in July. And I preach at churches, and I've done debates, and it's a working vacation type thing. But my sanity, people think that I just sit around reading books all day and writing, and it's just not the case. I've already been on bike 2 hours today. I burned 1,509 calories doing that. I was listening. I was studying while doing that. But that's a real important part of who I am. I think it keeps me from blowing up and getting like Arthur W. Pink and hating everybody. I think if he had ridden a bike, he probably would have been better off toward the end. But anyway, I go up to Colorado. Started going to Colorado in 2011. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I do high altitude riding up there. And one of the things I've been doing for years and years is called the triple bypass. And for a number of years, I did the double triple bypass, which in 2 days is 240 miles on bike with 21,000 feet of climbing, all at altitudes between 7,500 and 12,000 feet above sea level. So it's intense. And you remember, for years I've stayed with the same family up there, doing the dividing lines from the basement down there. That's unfortunately not something we're going to be able to continue doing in the future, but it was great to have that opportunity while we did. Well, they hadn't offered the double triple for years, and that's the hardest thing I can do. It's literally the hardest thing you can do. And I think when you train yourself to do something extremely, extremely hard, it makes you better for other things that you're doing in life. Unfortunately, they've now moved it to September. In fact, I think it's smack dab in the middle of the cruise. And by the way, I spoke with the folks, and we're supposed to do a conference call next week. Still looking at an 80% chance that the cruise will go off, that we will be able to do it. I don't know about you, but for those of you who are already signed up, We better make this happen, because I'm not so certain if this doesn't happen this year that it'll ever happen again. I mean, seriously. If you want to see some of these places, at least I've been there once. But you saw how fast Israel shut down, and I'm concerned about the future of our being able to travel as freely as we have in the past. So I really hope it happens, because I can tell you right now, that goes into October. There will be an October surprise. There will be. I can pretty much guarantee that. There's going to be an October surprise. I don't know what the nature of it's going to be, but there will be an October surprise. And if you don't know what an October surprise is, you're too young to have been through too many presidential elections. Now, of course, our October surprise may have been in February, and it's just a continuation of all that mess. But anyways, so I won't be able to do it in September, and I'm really royally bummed about that. I'm hoping my other rides later, because Jason Lyle and I are supposed to be doing a conference in Colorado Springs right toward the end of July, early August. And so that would coincide with what's called the Copper Triangle and the Bob Cook. They're only a week apart toward the end. And yeah, they're insane high altitude craziness too. So I'm looking at going up to Utah instead. And I let Jason know last night, so we're going to start talking about what I can do. Nope. But there are some rides that I have done out of Salt Lake up to what's called Guardsman Pass. That's 9,550 feet above sea level, and up to the Alta Ski Resort. That if you do the one, then the other, and then that one again, would be almost 13,000 feet of climbing in one day. And if I did that 2 days in a row, that would be very much as gut killing as the double. So I've got to have something like that to be working toward. I'm thinking about going outside tomorrow to do a metric century. It's a 100-kilometer bike ride. That means I got to get up no later than 3 o'clock in the morning. And you've got to have a reason to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. Otherwise, the body, which is fast moving towards 60 years of age, go back to sleep, you idiot. You got to have the other voice that goes, nope, you're not going to get up that mountain if you don't get out there and get this done. So yeah, that's what's going on there. So I'm bummed about the canceling of that. I was really concerned about that, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But I'm really hoping, really hoping that we will be able to do the cruise. Like I said, at the top of the hour, in an hour and a half from now, I will be on Iron Sharpens Iron with Chris Arnzen. And then next Thursday evening, so a week ago last night, Emilio Ramos and I are going to Red Grace Media. I'm going to be live with Emilio. And the only time I've been to Israel was with Emilio. And so he can tell you about climbing Masada, and there's lots of things that Emilio could tell you about, but there's lots of things I can tell you about Emilio too. That's how assured mutual destruction. It's how Russia and the United States kept the world safe in the 1960s, as we knew there wouldn't be anything but smoking ruins. The other one left. So that's how you do that too. Anyway, so I'm gonna be on with Emilio next Thursday evening. So put that on your calendar as well. We're gonna be talking about textual critical issues, and so we'll be doing that. Now, make sure I do not close that screen so that I don't lose that stuff. Now, yesterday I presented you with some information. I have taken. I put the scan on Facebook. I took a picture with my phone, the page on Facebook. I will try to get that I'll try to add that to yesterday's blog article when I'm blogging today's. I jetted out of. I told y'all that I had a perishable thing coming. I should have known that, given how late it was, 2 weeks late, it was already toast. But it was delivered at like 12:30. I didn't get home till like 4:30. So 4 hours sitting on a porch in Phoenix at 105 degrees. Have you ever seen a nice big plastic thing of dark chocolate covered almonds? When it's slush, I mean, you can literally go like this and it just slishes back and forth in the, it's very disgusting looking actually. But tastes fine. Just spoon, and it's not difficult. Are you looking up the picture? Oh, he's looking at the picture. I took a picture of it because I got a spoon out, and you just got to find an almond, and there'll be plenty of chocolate still on it. I stuck it in the refrigerator, and then I realized, well, that's just going to make it a hard mass. I've actually been sitting around going, well, how do I make like almond chocolate brittle out of this or something like that? Do I get out a cookie pan and let it sit outside? Yeah, there it is. There's I didn't have to rush yesterday, in other words. I did not have to rush because that's what came out of the box. I ordered it when it was still cool. We did not have a spring this year. Remember, we were sitting out on the porches. It was beautiful at night. It was in the 70s. That's when I ordered it. And it took so long because of all the silliness with stuff that we just went straight into the 90s. We had like 3 days in the 90s and straight up to 107. I've seen 109 on my car. Actually, at home, I saw 110.6 at home a couple days ago. So yeah, it's summer, and so that's what was left. That's what's still sitting there at home. But yeah, I maybe a cookie sheet. That'd be interesting. I'm not sure how that all work, but anyway. So you're just talking a lot today. Yes. So yesterday we looked at a certain quotation from Wilson's dissertation, which reads, "For Augustine, quote, to become a Manichae was to depart little if at all from being a Christian," end quote. And then I read you where that came from, and we discovered that it was badly misrepresenting Augustine and being used in such a way. I have made the statement, and I stand by the statement, that it is very plain to me that even and this is simply a place where we have to say, okay, we're in disagreement on this, but where it is plain to me that Dr. Wilson went into this study with a fixed idea and then dug up what he needed to find to substantiate that. That is my conclusion. I think I will be able to substantiate that very, very clearly from the data, and I think that data did, in fact, substantiate that rather well. So I want to go back. There are a couple things I have on my list in looking at the dissertation here. One was I want to work through. Well, let me just back up a second. What would be most useful for you as the audience? And what would be most useful for you in the audience in two ways? One, we didn't start this. This dissertation was being presented as the most scholarly, insightful, important work on Augustine ever done. No one else had ever seen what Ken Wilson had discovered, and it is demonstrative of the reality that if you're Reformed, you're really nothing more than a lackey for the Manichaeans in the modern world. That's what we were being told at the start, right? Yes?
The word comes to mind, the word's smoking gun. It was presented as the smoking gun against Calvinism.
Oh, yeah. This book first started circulating. And then, hey, if you can't, James White can't deal with this. This is it. This is so far beyond him, he can't touch it. Well, all right. I'll admit, I'll take a challenge. I think I was probably one of the first people to read Bart Ehrman's doctoral dissertation before debating him. I've read a lot of doctoral dissertations, and I'm working on one myself, and so I know what's required. And in fact, one of the things that I'm thinking about doing is I'm working on a certain section of mine. Mine isn't going very fast right now for one simple reason, and COVID has not helped with this. My data set for my dissertation work in examining P45 will increase by 55% when Mark is released from the people working on CBGM and Mark in Munster. It's already done. I was told that a year and a half ago when I went to Munster, that Mark was done. It was just a matter of getting it published, getting it online. COVID has not helped with any of this stuff, obviously, especially in Germany. I mean, we're complaining about the lockdown in Arizona. We got it really good. I mean, I'll be honest. We joke with you folks, California. I honestly do feel for you because we really haven't been locked down here. We've been locked down in the sense that I've been going to certain restaurants to try to help keep them alive. So I pick up my order and I mean, this one restaurant, you know which one I'm talking about. I just call and it's like, hey, Scott, hey, James, I'll put it in. Thanks. And you go by and they even, I always put the same tip in, about 35%. They just automatically just bill me that now. So I don't even have to write it in. It's just, all I got to do is, thanks, see you later, talk to you later, bye, So I'm just trying to help them in that way. But it's not like, when I'm driving down the road, the last thought in my mind is that there's going to be flashing lights behind me and a cop's going to pull me over and what are you doing out? That's not Arizona. That's even here in Phoenix, that's not Arizona. People in other places, it is. Most definitely. I get it. I mean, man, that poor chick in Canada. On the May 4th in a stormtrooper outfit, and people are calling 911 because she's got a blaster. Oh my goodness. The level of stupidity on the part of everybody. Not her, but everybody. Oh, don't even get me started on that. I'm sorry. Anyway, how did I get into this? Anyways, so that's why things have been slowed down, is when your data set's can increase by 55% tomorrow, because it could, all of a sudden, I might see the announcement. It's now available, and man, talk about ordering something fast. That's going to when that happens, I'm just going to tell everybody right now, I'm going to have to prioritize very, very, very strongly. And there may be some of you going, oh, you didn't finish doing this. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because, but I'm still working on other stuff. And I've really thought about putting out a section of the work that I'm doing and saying, I'll tell you what, let's make this fair. I will provide this to Dr. Wilson and let Dr. Wilson critique my work on P45, utilizing CBGM technology in regards that would specifically be in the Book of Acts, because that's all we've got with P45 and CBGM is Acts. Mark will have it as well. That's why it's really important. John would have it as well, but only in John 10, 11. Well, there's one verse in chapter 4, chapter 5. Well, a couple verses, but almost nothing there. And eventually Matthew and Luke, but don't know when they're going to be coming out. So there would be other stuff, but make it fair, I suppose. But it also, I think, would illustrate a very major difference in how you approach doing scholarship. A very major difference. Really does. But I'll do it. I would have absolutely no qualms about doing that at all. So I was thinking about that. So, like I said, when we're going through this stuff, I want to benefit a number of people, but this audience is filled with people who have interest in Reformed theology, interest in textual criticism, interest in church history, interest in theology in general. You want to be able to respond when people say, Reformed theology is nothing but Manichaeism. But at the same time, I want to give enough background on these things that you're learning more about church history as well, because this is going to be so useful in dealing with Mormonism and Islam. I want the study to be more than just demonstrating that this one theory is utterly indefensible, because it is. I want it to be so much more edifying to a much broader audience than that. So to do that, what do we need to focus upon? Do we need to examine every single page of 300 some odd, 350 some odd pages? Really, actual text is probably more like 280, something along those lines. When you get all into it, is that what we need to do, or is there a briefer way of doing that would be more effective because it would focus in upon that? So as I look at the dissertation, obviously, its discussion of the backgrounds has to be dealt with, because here's the backgrounds that are listed. You've got Gnosticism, Stoicism, Cicero or Cicero, depending on how you pronounce it, Judaism, and thankfully the ancient First Temple period Tanakh, Second Temple period and Apocrypha, the Qumran sect, Philo, and rabbinic literature. That at least is a meaningful. That's a meaningful breakdown of what you would have to look at that would be relevant at this point. It's meaningful. I don't know that he consistently follows that, because as we see later on, he talks about Jews believe this, and it's like, well, which one? We already pointed that out. Then after Judaism, Neoplatonism. So Ptolemy and other people, and Manichaeism, which we've already started doing some work on. You've probably already picked up most of what you need on the Manichaeism. Then we already started looking at Chapter 2, Traditional Free Choice Christian Authors, from 95 to 215. And why 215? Well, I'm not sure why he broke exactly there, but once you get into the middle of the 3rd century there, Mani starts coming along. So maybe, so we already looked at Clement. We looked at the Epistle to Diognetus, sorry. And this is where he's going through, and I don't know that I'm going to have time to do this. There would be value in looking at this, because one of the primary arguments that he makes is there is this absolute unanimity. Everybody believes the same thing. And what I have said from the beginning was, this was not the subject of debate at this time in church history. You don't find entire books on this topic. The energy is on other subjects, and there are many people who have taught church history for years that have said the exact same thing. So while it was useful to look at like how he handled Clement and completely ignored, with one exception, the evidence there that very plainly would point the other direction. For a lot of this, it would be just an extensive investment of time. Then you have other Chapter 3, Traditional Free Choice Christian Authors from 216 to 430. Then you've got Augustine's works. And so you're going through Augustine's works all the way through Sermons and Letters of Chapter 9. And part of the argument there is, did Augustine go back and edit and change later books? And that's already a given. People already admit that he did that, because he said he did that. But did he did it? Did he did it? Did he do that without telling us? In other instances is what is addressed there, and that's not of great import to me. But Chapter 10 is important, and that is Augustine's exegesis of Scripture, and that's what we are starting to look at Because that's where I really, really feel that there is an incredible bias demonstrated by Dr. Wilson in his handling of Augustine. But then, of course, you've got the conclusion. The conclusion lays all this stuff out, and that's really where you then have what comes into what's going to impact most people. Most people aren't going to read this. Most people are reading this. Well, where did this come up with the incredible conclusions it comes up with, that if you're a Reformed Christian, you're actually a Manichaean, and that your beliefs on this subject of determinism actually came from Mani and not from reading the institutes and following the exegesis that Calvin provides of key texts in Hebrew or Greek and things like that. It's actually all from Mani. That's what you get into in the conclusion. So what has to be established by this dissertation is a meaningful definition of the dupied concept. When I say meaningful, that means it can't be an artificial construct that is simply meant to connect things that have no meaningful connection in history or real life, in logic. Anybody can come up with a way to connect disparate things together. The reality is it something that is drawn from the text, or is it something that is crammed into the text? That's the key issue. And it is painfully obvious that no matter how great Augustine's influence is upon Calvin, for example, that from Calvin onward, there has been tremendous work done in demonstrating the biblical foundations of Reformed theology. And trying to dismiss that by simply saying, yeah, well, but the early church. And we already have addressed this, but I want to make sure everyone does understand that issue of the early church. Seems to me that in the interview and in some of the statements that are being made, that the early centuries become the exegetical lens through which everything else is supposed to be viewed. They don't do that in their wider theology, but on this subject, you're supposed to. There's an inconsistency there, major inconsistency there. So, if we demonstrate what the historical context was, and that people were not cranking books out in every generation on the subject of foreknowledge and divine election and predestination, and then eventually I do want to have at least some attention paid to the issue of the amazing comments made, especially in the popularized book, about Augustine and the doctrine of baptism, Augustine and the doctrine of faith as a gift, and asserting that this somehow is derived from Manichaeism and stuff like this. When there were all sorts of people before Augustine who had understood Ephesians 2 in that way. That kind of stuff will be useful because it gets us into exegesis. It gets us into all sorts of issues along those lines as well. But yeah, that's the sort of the plan of attack to work through this stuff. So while it would be more fun for me, well, for example, let me back up a second. When you look at chapter 10, it's useful because you can see Augustine's exegesis of Scripture in the tractate on the Gospel of John, in his narrations of the Psalms, and then section D, mistranslations that created doctrine. Mistranslations. And he includes Ephesians 2:8 through 10. That'll be fun to work through. That's sort of in our wheelhouse, shall we say. Yes, I've already looked at it. And then Initium Fidei, the beginning of faith, other mistranslations, 1 Timothy 2:4, 1 John 2:2. Does any of this sound familiar? Romans 9 through 11, Philippians 2:13. We'll want to look at all those, because what you have here is Dr. Wilson arguing against Augustine in these texts, but he's arguing from the modern provisionalist standpoint and the anti-lordship form of modern evangelicalism, which, again, I don't know how that doesn't get challenged at Oxford, but hey, what can I say? And then, like I said, the conclusion is really important because it really lays everything out, especially as stuff is being used as being used today. So, and application being made. But as I said, I had gone through page 36, and so I wanted to pick up at that point. And I'm just trying to remember here where I stopped, and I've only got a few minutes. At the bottom of page 36, efforts to rescue the Qumranites from divine unilateral predetermination of individuals' eternal destinies. Individuals, it's interesting. Prove insuperable due to their belief in God's direct control over every thought, emotion, and action within irreparably damaged human worms. Now remember, Scripture uses worm of man many times, but this is meant to communicate something. Considering the parallels in Jewish heritage, baptismal emphases, astrology, services held facing the sun, and extended light-dark motifs, Qumran and Manichaeism may have shared not only a common Weltanschauung, worldview, but a common Quella, source, in ancient Indo-Mesopotamian religion. So, baptismal emphases, astrology, and services held facing the sun, light-dark motifs, Qumran and Manichaeism may have shared not only a common Weltanschauung, but a common Quella in ancient Indo-Mesopotamian religion. Ancient authors from Herodotus to Porphyry affirm Zoroaster's Magians living throughout the Mediterranean had similar traditions to later Manichaeans with astrological interests in singing hymns while abstaining from meat, alcohol, and sexual intercourse. Well, that's certainly a part of Manichaeism, but it's a part of a large number of man's religions. Large number of man's religions. In all of these religions, persons are divinely created for the purpose of eternal damnation or blessing. That simply isn't true. We've already demonstrated that. The Manichaean God never created a man to begin with. So how can you even make this statement? In all of these religions, persons are divinely created for the purpose of eternal damnation or blessing. How put yourself in a Manichaean's shoes who lives in Mesopotamia, who isn't in the Roman Empire, around the time of Mani, was one of his original followers. Would they have even understood what you're talking about? They don't have a creator God. They have equal forces of light and darkness. So what is damnation or blessing? Blessing is to have the light that is trapped inside your body released back into the realm of light. But your body came into existence, your race came into existence because of demons mating, who were trying to keep the light trapped in darkness. And once you have that understanding of what's really going on, then you start to see the artificial connectivity that is being created here. You're creating an artificial connection to promote a theory, to promote an idea. Most folks look at Manichaeism and go, if there is any similarity in language, any similarity in, they have the elect. There is no logical or rational connection to the concept of the elect within Christianity. Because the worldview of the two is so completely different that you can't make the categories mesh at all. So one of the problems in studying in the theories of religion in our universities is that they view religions as if they are made of, if they're tinker toy religions. Some of you don't know what a tinker toy is. I suppose I should say Lego religions. Most people know Lego. Most people are tinker toy. May still exist. I don't know. But that was my youth. So you could take, when I had tinker toys, or I never got into Legos, but you can take Legos and you get a big box and you put it on the floor, and there's all these different shapes and stuff, and you can put them together in various and sundry different ways. That's how scholarship looks at religion. And you can just reconstruct things, and so if I make a tank out of my Legos, and I make a plane out of my Legos, and there are blue Legos in the plane and blue Legos in the tank, they're obviously related. Well, I suppose they are related amongst Legos. They were made at the Lego factory. It's probably more than one Lego factory. I don't know. But is there really any conceptual connection just because there's a blue Lego in a tank and a blue Lego in a plane? Is that a meaningful connection? Well, they're both blue. They look alike, but one's in a tank and one's in a plane. Or maybe one's in a plane and maybe I made those both weapons, but one's in a plane and one's in a dinosaur. Is there really a connection? Not one that carries information or meaning. That's the issue. So the point is, it talks about singing hymns. Yeah, while abstaining from meat. Well, that's never been heard of before. That's how many religions could we trace that to? I mean, I'll bet you anything that I could study contemporary South American, Mayan, Mayans came later, Olmec and Toltec. Yeah, Olmec and Toltec, those would be contemporary. South American, Central American religions. And find fasting, baptisms, astrology, facing of the sun for also must come from the same thing. Somebody must have gone across the ocean. The Book of Mormon's true after all. Hey, see how this works? Lego history. Don't want to go there. That's not what serious people do, but you can do it. It's very common to do this stuff. It's how you get books published, and it's how you come up with your thing. And yeah, so. The Indo-Mesopotamian dogma of total inability of free will, coupled with a totalitarian providence, absolute micromanagement, necessitated a divinely infused radical grace to invade the human heart, mind or heart for salvation. I don't think almost anybody in the ancient world would have any idea what in the world he was babbling about at that point. I really don't. The Indo-Mesopotamian dogma of total inability of free will. Why? Well, it depends on which religion you're talking about. If you want to talk about some of the background religions to Manichaeism, as long as you've got strict dualism, none of this has anything to do with a meaningful concept of creation of mankind, the will of man as even a morally relevant thing. Because if all you've got the Father of Light doing is emanating things to defend the kingdom against the invasion of darkness, and then you got demons mating and mankind comes out of that, please, Dr. Wilson, there is no connection to what we're saying at that point. Can you not see that? Can you not see that? It's obvious, isn't it? That's the chasm is too wide to be able to bridge at this particular point in time. So you're utilizing anachronistically and inaccurately terminology that would have one meaning over there and have one meaning there, have a different meaning over there, and then bring this all together. A totalitarian providence? How do you get that? What do you mean a totalitarian providence? All that God and Manichaeism does, or even Gnosticism does, is emanate stuff. There's no decree. There is no absolute micromanagement. After the first war in Manichaeism, do you think that there was like, okay, now I'm in control of the situation, so the next thing we're going to do is this, and he's going to do that because I'm micromanaging? No, they'd be going, what are you talking about? They would have no earthly idea. No way of understanding what in the world is being said. Well, I would like to continue on. I'm now on page 37. We got through an entire paragraph. I'd like to continue on, but like I said, I've got Iron Sharpens Iron coming up in an hour, and there's this little thing called lunch that needs to be done between now and then, or I'm going to be babbling by the time, I might be babbling by the time we're done with the other one. Anyways. But we will press on with this. Thank you very much for listening all this week. We have to keep doing lots of programs to keep those of you in leftist states company as you are locked down by your leftist governors, who I hope you remember in about 180 days you have the opportunity of getting rid of them, because that's going to be important. Anyway, of course, you may be on a different election schedule, but anyways, lots of stuff going on. We will, Lord willing, not be back on Monday. So we'll be back on Tuesday on the program. We will see you then. God bless.